All right, so for our next project, we're going to start out on our bags. To begin this, we need to look at how to read a pattern. The patterns in this class will probably look a little bit different from the patterns you've used commercially sewing or from other projects because they are custom made. This is the case for a lot of patterns in theater and in fashion design, that you are custom making patterns to suit your needs. So they're not going to come in a pre-packaged little commercial bin. They're going to be made out of paper. Tracing paper is often this thick white cardstocky type stuff, but more often than not it's like brown paper that you'll find on rolls in the costume shop. So we're going to start out by looking at some of the pattern pieces for our bag. So each pattern piece you'll have, this one is for the pocket, has got a couple different features. First of all, it is shaped in the shape that you'll need to cut your fabric out of. This is really convenient because you can put it down and see how much fabric you're going to need to use this for. On this piece, though, there are some interesting pieces of information that you're going to need to know in order to use the pattern properly. First of all, the pattern will say what it is. So it'll say what it's for. It's for the Fundamentals of Costume Sewing Lab, Fundies. It is for our backpack project, and those are the first two things. This is the bag flap, so it's actually not the pocket, which is good that it identified it because it's pocket shaped. So that's the point of that. There's bag flap. And then down here it says what you're cutting. So we're going to cut one out of our fashion fabric and one out of our lining fabric. This is important when it comes time to cut if you're a first hand, because you need to know how much of each thing that you're going to cut out. NSA stands for no seam allowance, which brings us to our next portion of this pattern, which is the seam allowance markings. In commercial patterns, seam allowance is usually included, but that is not the case for custom-made patterns because of the way we want to trace seam lines. So you'll notice on the edges here, it says plus 5/8. That means that you're going to need to add 5/8 of an inch all the way around to be your seam allowance while sewing. If you don't include this, you're not going to be able to make the project properly because there will be nothing for you to sew on. You'll be trying to sew right on this edge and that won't work. The reason we don't include seam allowances just built into drafted patterns, like the reason why we don't have it just be 5/8 of an inch bigger, is because when it comes time to trace the pattern, which we will do in our next video, you're going to want to trace both the outside of this, which will be your stitching line, and then the 5/8 line, which will be where you cut. So they do it like this so that you can easily mark your stitching line, which is more difficult on a commercial pattern. The last thing that you really need to notice on this is this arrow. This arrow marks the grain line, which is a feature on commercial patterns and theatrical patterns alike, drafted patterns. The way that this works is you need to take a ruler and line this line up with the selvage edge of the fabric. So it needs to be the part that it was woven on. This makes it so that if you're using a pattern, it'll be facing the correct way, or if you're just sewing solid fabric, it'll make it so that the weave is the strongest it can be in the proper direction. So for this one, we've got this arrow here. That means that the edge of the fabric needs to line up this way. It needs to be parallel with this line. So that is important, and I will go over marking that with you in class so that it's easier when you come time to cut your fabric. So this is how to read a pattern. You'll notice we've got quite a few other pieces. I'll point at this one. This one has got a couple different things. So it's got all of the information we saw, but there's the instruction, cut one on fold. Now you'll be like, well, what does that mean? Then you see this. This little bad boy with the square and the arrows, this is where you line it up to the fold of the fabric. So this way you'll get something twice as long as this, it's all connected in one, without having to try to do anything weird with the fabric. So that is a convenient and important mark to look for. If you cut this out not on the fold, you're going to have half of what you need, instead of having a nice long piece. When it comes time to pin these to our fabric, we'll be using push pins into the table, which I will demonstrate in the next video. Thanks for watching.